Welcome to the TCG Compass podcast, presented by Amber Grading, a mostly weekly discussion on trading card games and the people who love them.
How's it going, everyone? I'm your host, Daniel, and I'm joined today by our co-host, Grant.
Hi there.
Today's show, we're going to talk about unique and unusual cards and TCG-related things.
We'll talk about oddities, rare cards, and things that are just generally interesting to collect.
Yep, so no matter which TCG we're discussing, there's always something weird that comes up, whether it's like a misprint or like a one-off or, you know, just stuff that they print one time and never do again. I know there's plenty of examples throughout Magic history, Pokemon's, even with Final Fantasy TCG, there's some really interesting stuff there. In terms of Pokemon, do you have anything, Grant, that's just like really weird or unique or, you know, a one-off?
Yeah, you know, one of the more fun things in my like card collecting is I would go to Japan every year and pick up, you know, different things from the Pokemon centers out there. And they would always have like some limited edition box. And they did a whole series on Pikachu wearing the poncho of other Pokemon. So it's like the super cute, super collectible thing. And here's like one of the card sleeves. They had a Pikachu, cosplaying Charizard X and Y, wearing that poncho. And it's like kind of a cool little, piece of history. And it came like in this collectible box. And, it was just like a neat little piece of history, super limited run, one and done. You would be limited to the number that you would buy. And, they've really become really rare, in the wild sealed, and then even like some of the pieces, like the promo of this card. So like there was a promo card printed for this too, and that card is going for over $1,000.
Well, that's pretty awesome. Did that come with like a deck box or anything else, or was it just the sleeves?
It came with a deck box, a couple of packs of sleeves, some standard packs at the time. Of course, it's Japanese, so they're the thin packs. And like a big commemorative carrying case. So like this is like the box that it came in, and it has like some of the other Pikachu cosplay on here too. So like Ampharos and the Charizards, of course. So it's kind of a neat little piece. And so I try to keep a lot of cards in here just because I think it's a cool little box.
That's awesome. I wish I had one of those. I know it seems like, the Japanese markets get some really cool, unique stuff, especially for Pokemon, but also for Magic the Gathering. They get a lot of special attention. One of the most recent promos that I got, and it was a media insert for Bone Shredder with art by Ron Spencer. And it's just really cool art from the original Urza's Legacy set. And then the text got a little bit of updating. It's now a Phyrexian creature type. Super cool, just a throwback, but something that was distributed in like a very limited way, but only to the Japanese markets. And I feel like some of the most interesting one-offs or misprints or oddities, they all came from like foreign sources. I know back in the day in Revise or Foreign Black Border. There's all kinds of messed up stuff. One of my favorite ones was the forest that got printed using Plains art. It's like, I don't know how that got by, but, it says Wald, which is forest in German. It's got the text that's correct for a forest, but the frame and the art is a Plains, and it messes with people when they see it. Cause like, when you look at that art instinctively, you think, oh, there's a Plains, but it's like, nope, that's a forest. It's pretty fun. What kind of Magic the Gathering stuff do you really enjoy that's in this realm?
So one of the things that I think you kind of see a lot of these now, just because some of these cards have gotten really expensive. But back in the day, before the internet was huge, they printed these World Championship decks. So they have a different Magic back. It has kind of the city that the person won it in, and the name of the pilot of the deck. And there's some pretty high value cards that have been printed in gold border, quote unquote, not tournament legal. But this is on the same stock as Magic cards and whatnot. And it's it's like a really nice piece that, if you didn't have the money to shell out for like a Gaia's Cradle or a Grim Monolith, this is one of those things that is a good budget alternative for it, especially because it's like an actual, magic printed version of the card.
Yeah, those the World Championship decks are some of my favorites. I have a box back here for one of them. I think that was like 98. But they started in 1996, and it was with just one deck. It was a mono white deck, and it was the championship deck, the one that won it all. And then starting from there, you got 4 decks a year, and then went all the way up until like 2008, I think. And the backs changed throughout the years. It's that precedence for Pokemon, which is really cool. So Pokemon still, I think, gets these World Championship decks. I know I have one as late as like 2016. But it's like a cool way for you to get access to these cards that you wouldn't normally, have access to, but the entire deck that you get to play with right out of the box. And some of them have started to gain like tremendous value. I know with Gaia's Cradle nearing $1,000 per card, the gold border one from the Matt Lynn deck, it's now like almost $200 for a gold border non-tournament legal card. It's super cool because it's official product. It's got the same art. The only difference is it's got that gold border. It's got the signature of the creator, and then it's got that black back. But in a sleeve, I mean, it's mostly the same thing.
Yeah. And like there's like other oddities too. Like sometimes they release cards for special markets. So like this was released in Hong Kong and Taiwan for Lunar New Year. And so, obviously there aren't a whole lot of these in existence because those markets are, so small when you compare it to the whole world if they wanted to collect it. I picked mine up pretty cheap, $25-$30, hoping that treasure tokens were going to be, one of the things that become evergreen where they kind of include in every set, and they did. So, these have kind of spiked up to $250-ish now. It has a cute little back too. It has the little doggo from that one Planeswalker. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah, is it Xinyang? That's the one.
Yeah. And then another weird piece of Magic history is back in Plane Shift, when I played back in the day, they had these alternate arts for 3 cards, and no one really knows how rare these are. I mean, I kind of keep track of these sales online, but like, so Skyship Weatherlight, the art's not too different. It's just flipped more or less from the original. But Tangarth is pretty different with his stance. He's like coming at you. And then Urtai, which is a pretty sweet art. So
those are awesome.
I super collected the Urtai here. I think this is like one of the cooler ones, especially because it's that old gold card treatment, right? It has like that gold, green, black color to it. But yeah, the weird thing about these 3 cards are there's the regular art in foil as well. So it's not like they just replaced all the foils of this in the product. There's also the regular arts in foil. So these, I think, are pretty rare, and we'll never know how rare they actually are. But, that's a neat little piece of Magic history, because they didn't start really doing alt arts again, randomly inserted until like Conspiracy 2, I think, with the Kaya Ghost Assassin. Mm-hmm. But now, of course, it's become a little bit more commonplace. But that's kind of like one of the original places that they kind of tested the market with it.
Yeah, those were really cool, super unique. And if you weren't playing at that time, you probably would never know about those cards. They're not necessarily staples in any format. They don't see a lot of play. But they're like super collectible because they are so niche and so rare. But going back a little bit further, speaking of stuff that only appeared, sometimes, was the Mountain from Arabian Nights. The entire set was supposed to be produced without basic lands, and there must have been like some kind of review that they were doing that failed to recognize that there was still a basic land that got shoved in. So, you got the Douglas Schuler art, which is my favorite art. And for a long time, they weren't worth much because, like, you could pick up a beta version for $1 or less. So this one was only like, a few bucks, maybe $10 at the time, and have since just skyrocketed in value, which is super cool. But hopefully they give us a foil printing of that art someday and complete the cycle like they did for the Reno promos in the early 2000s. That would be pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think super collectors have kind of like an interesting effect on the market, because I know a couple of years back, I saw someone post their Arabian Nights Mountain collection for sale, and they estimated that it accounted for about 5% of all Arabian Nights mountains still in existence. And you're just like, that's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. The super collectors are a thing, people who just love one particular card and maybe started collecting it as soon as it was printed, back in the day, 20, 30 years ago, and have just been picking up copies ever since. I know someone in our group who was picking up Deathrite Shamans like they were nuts, I think he had like 1,700 copies of it or something, maybe more. And then it tanked in value, and I reprinted it, and he just kept buying, and I think it's going to turn out to be a pretty good investment. I mean, that card is insane, and if it ever gets unbanned, it's like, wow, it's going to be nuts.
And I think a lot of people have their fingers crossed for unbannings, right? Like every time, there's a ban and restricted list announcement, people are hoping, Stoneforge Mystic and Deathrite Shaman, right? Like people are sitting on pretty big stashes of those. So yeah, super collectors definitely have an interesting impact on the market in general.
They certainly do. I know a friend of mine also collects Gladenaires. Card will never see play in anything, will never be valuable, but he's just like gloves Gladenair, and so he's got thousands of copies of it. And that's kind of a cool one too, because it's not affecting gameplay at all. Nobody's like, oh my god, I need to buy 20 copies of Gladenair for all my decks. It's like just never going to happen. But like shifting gears a little bit to another game that's close to me is Final Fantasy TCG. And I've talked about it a little bit in the past, which was Opus 1, Wave 1. And it was kind of like the equivalent of like the alpha for Magic the Gathering, where it was like a set that they released. There was some errors throughout. There's some printing mistakes that they wanted to get cleaned up. One of them in particular is the sword crossing Ramza. Same is true for Squall, where you got like this background character who looks like they're getting their head chopped off. And it just like didn't really go over too well with a lot of the audience, so they immediately fixed it. The other thing that was really common in these is that they didn't align the colon quite right on them. So on the very bottom, I'm not sure if you're able to see that or not. The colon is lower justified rather than in the middle of the sentence. So it's one of the dead giveaways for the Opus 1, Wave 1. The other thing too, but it's a little less telling, is the justification of the crystal on the top. It's supposed to be down a little bit lower. The only problem with this is that if a Opus 1 Wave 2 printing was not justified correctly, it could look like an Opus 1 Wave 1, but there's nothing like definite there with the ones that don't have that colon giveaway. But yeah, so Grant, are there any other like Magic the Gathering or Pokemon oddities that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, like Pokemon has a lot of little interesting things. They have a history of having super rare cards that, only one or a handful of them really ever made it out into the world. Of course, the Illustrator card is one of the most famous cards in all of card collecting, right? You'll know people who collect sports cards that know that it exists, and, especially with a lot of the Twitch and YouTubers, coming into the collecting space recently, like it's like one of the hallmarks of collecting as a hobby. In addition to that, there's all those ones where it's like hard to track down because they're either tucked away in a collection or it's someone's, grand prize, like the 2010 Pokemon World Championship card, the Master Key Trophy, things
Hawaii,
like that.
Right?
Yep, it was in Hawaii. Even like Gold Star cards like Espeon and Umbreon. Recently, I've seen that the collectability of all the evolutions are kind of seeing a rise across the board, even as Pokemon kind of settles after they had a crazy 2021. A lot of the evolutions are seeing a lot of popularity among collectors, whereas, in the past it's been mostly a Pikachu and Charizard driven market. People are loving Espeon, Umbreon, Sylveon, Glaceon, Leafeon, like all of them. So, just knowing that the tastes are starting to mature and stratify, I think is kind of a cool, thing to kind of keep your eye on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I saw in one of the PSA annual reports that Blastoise was one of the most commonly graded cards by them. And I think last month they did almost 750,000 graded cards, and so they have good data about what is most common, most likely to be graded by any particular game. Or card type, and it was cool to see that Pikachu and of course Charizard, they're up there, but Blastoise is like on that top 5 list. It's interesting to see that change, maybe not a change, but like a little bit of clarity into like what people really want.
Yeah, it's interesting too because as more and more sets are printed, and people are still getting a lot of the more recently printed cards graded, I think a lot of it will also depend on, how many of those newer sets that are printed do have, the base set starter evolutions in there. Will also kind of, dictate kind of the volume that they receive. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely like a big data point that I'm glad they're releasing, because it really shows like, is this Pikachu Charizard era that we're living in, or is it starting to shift to Mewtwo evolutions, other generations, starter Pokemon evolutions, things like that. All of that's kind of like you really get to see like which legendaries are popular and things like that, and it's cool. And I think the mobile game helps it along too, because people are having a lot more exposure to maybe generations that they're not as familiar with.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the online play for both Pokemon and Magic the Gathering is really robust, and I think it gives you and the average player a lot more access to cards and to formats, at least in some regards, but also just like getting to see cards that they wouldn't normally get to see. I mean, before, MTGO, if you wanted to see cards, you had to go to a game store, and then all of a sudden you could play any format online at any time. And then, with Arena and with Pokemon Online, it's like you could literally hop on 24 hours a day and just jam games. And there's just so much more exposure than you'd usually get, which is really awesome for the game. But kind of shifting gears back to Magic the Gathering, a lot of people don't know that in China, it's, I don't know if uncouth is the word, maybe illegal to show any kind of skeletal remains is either frowned upon or illegal. But in any Magic the Gathering card that would show these remains, the art had to be changed. And we see this a lot in like the Portal 1 era. It's really interesting because, Black has tons of skeletons throughout the history. And, it's weird that one particular language requires so much more effort just to make it work. What are your thoughts and experiences with that?
Yeah, I think just in general, right? It's just a cultural difference, a different cultural norm than what we're used to. I know other games like World of Warcraft has had to change their art style and even some of their character models as a result of the same cultural norm too. I think as a whole, right, people who play these card games now think that it's kind of like an antiquated like expectation and things like that. But it's just something that as card games and video games in general, move into foreign markets, there is a certain level of, respect that you kind of have to put onto it. Right. So, the Chinese market saying like, we don't want, kind of the death and skeletons and zombie like type thing, featured on anything, having to go back and change art or clothe, skeletons and things like that is just part of the process of working with that market. And, you see a lot of it, where certain games and certain publishers will have like a Chinese specific arm to it. So a lot of these things can be addressed prior to something's launch. And then that way you don't run into the same like bottlenecks when it comes to the approvals on that end.
It's really interesting that this happens, but before it ever happened in the Chinese language, it happened in the English printings. I mean, there was Unholy Strength that was printed, an ABU, and then there was outrage because there was a flaming pentagram in the background. And sure enough, by fourth edition, pentagram's gone. So while this is like pretty ubiquitous in the Chinese printing that they make these changes, like they still happen in English, or have happened in English printings as well. But one of the cooler and lesser known facts, though, is with Portal 1. In the Chinese printing specifically, all or most 4 of the 5 basic lands got unique art that was only printed in Chinese and nowhere else. And I think that was actually a product of what you're talking about, Grant, which is that They have this other arm that's controlling the printing and the arts and the combination of the cards, and then they end up with this like really cool oddity.
Yeah, and I think one of the things too is not only are there like the cultural norm side, but kind of like the zeitgeist, right? I think part of the reason why Unholy Strength's art had to change, from that point moving forward was, there was this concern among parents during that time where they thought Dungeons and Dragons was like kind of cultish and Magic the Gathering was kind of cultish. So, you kind of had to, bend, in a certain direction to kind of be a little bit more conservative on, the symbols that are out there and whatnot. And, it's, not a big deal now. But if you go back then, there's all these cases of like, there was that student that disappeared because while he was playing in Dungeons and Dragons, or that was one of his hobbies and stuff. And that really just like captured the national imagination, being like, are my kids being corrupted by these games and things like that? And, it's just, it's something that unless you lived in that era, you wouldn't have the same like concerns or fears, 20, 30 years later, we fast forward and you're just kind of like, oh yeah, that's right. That did happen back then.
Yeah. I mean, we saw the same stuff now. It's just manifested a little bit differently.
Yeah.
But so I think that's all the time we have for today. Grant, where can our viewers and listeners find you?
You can look me up on Facebook or Instagram. My handle is @Chuggy_Bear.
And to get in touch with us or to ask us any questions, see the episode description or head over to ambergrading.com/TCG Compass. We'd love to hear from you.
That's our show for today. Thank you for joining us on the TCG Compass podcast. I've been your co-host, Chuggy.
And I've been your host, Daniel. We'll see you next time.
This has been the TCG Compass podcast, presented by Amber Grading. Thanks for listening. You can find us at ambergrading.com/TCG Compass. At Amber Grading on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. Or drop us an email, tcgcompass@ambergrading.com.